Hi, thanks for joining me, Mindy Mandell here. So I've gotten multiple requests to talk about Plotinus. I did do one of his Enneads last month, but I decided to do another one today. And so today I'm going to look at his essay on beauty, Ennead 1-6. So for those of you not familiar with Plotinus, he wrote in the 3rd century, and he is considered in academia to be the father of Neoplatonism. Now, I personally don't really like the word Neoplatonism. I think that it's really just a way for academics to try to separate these later Platonists off from Plato himself. They want to argue that Plato was not really spiritual, and but Plotinus and Proclus and some others, they're openly mystical, and so they want to separate them off. And so they created this new school called Neoplatonism. I don't really use that word, but I wanted to introduce it to you because if you read about Plotinus, you're bound to come across that word if you haven't already. Okay, so Plotinus's writings are 54 essays in total. One of his students organized them into 6 groups of 9, and that has become the international organization of these essays. The word Ennead is just the Greek word for a group of 9. So the one that we're going to be looking at is 1-6, and this is again the international organization. So of course different translators will translate the titles differently, and of course these Enneads are translated into many different languages. But whichever translator it is, whichever country it's in, whichever language it's translated into, it'll be called Ennead 1-6. The translation I'm going to be using is from Thomas Taylor. He actually calls it a paraphrase, although it stays remarkably close to the translations of others. But where he was a little bit liberal with his translation, he did it only to clarify some of the metaphysics, and so it's actually a very good translation to use, I think. By the way, those of you who have the McKenna translation, that's also a very good one. Okay, that in mind, let's get into it. So this is separated into 9 sections, and as I did with the other video on Plotinus, I'm going to separate the quotes that I pull out by the sections, and I gave a little title to each section that I think summarizes what that section is about. So what Plotinus often does is whatever topic he's talking about, he'll start at the physical level, and then he'll work up to the most divine or most profound manifestation of that particular topic. And so here we're talking about beauty. We'll start with physical beauty, and he'll work up to beauty itself. So the question he asks initially is whether beauty is symmetry and proportion, a very common definition of beauty. So he asks, what is it then which causes bodies to appear fair to the sight, sounds beautiful to the ear, in science and virtue lovely to the mind? May we not inquire after what manner they all partake of beauty? So beauty comes in so many different forms that it's hard to recognize anything that runs through all of them that we can call by the same name, beauty. Whether beauty is one and the same in all, or whether the beauty of bodies is one and the beauty of souls of another. And again, what these are if they are two, or what beauty is if it's perfectly simple in one. Are there 2 kinds of beauty? The beauty of bodies, the beauty of souls, are they 2 different things? Or are they one, and is there something that ties them together? It is the general opinion that a certain commensuration or symmetry of parts to each other and to the whole, with the addition of color, generates that beauty which is the object of sight, and that in the commensurate and the moderate or proportion alone, the beauty of everything consists. So a common definition that we see of beauty is that it's symmetry and proportion. And I put those words in brackets, by the way, because they do appear in some other translations, and because I think these are the words that most of you are probably more familiar with. So in art and in architecture and things like this, we often will hear this definition of beauty that it's about symmetry and proportion. Plotinus, though, does have a problem with this definition. He says, from such an opinion, the compound only and not the simple can be beautiful. The single parts will have no peculiar beauty and will only merit that appellation by conferring to the beauty of the whole. So it may be fine, you may be able to make that case that that's the definition of beauty when you're dealing with things at the physical level, but as you go up to soul and then to intellect and to beauty itself, it becomes more and more problematic. And he does give some examples in this section, but we're going to see as we go on that when he gets to beauty itself, he's talking about something that is simple. And so this definition is insufficient. Okay, but before he goes there, he's going to talk a little bit more about bodily beauty. So what is the similitude then between the beauties of sense and that beauty which is divine? For if there be any similitude, the respective objects must be similar. Now he's going to explain this a little more, and notice that the metaphysics or the view of the nature of reality that he is implying here is quite different from our modern view. And so there may be a challenge here. As you're reading him, you want to contemplate what is implied or what condition would have to be in order for this to be true. And that will start to give you some sense of his understanding of the nature of reality and the realms of reality and how they unfold. Okay, that in mind, here's what he writes. For it is by participation of species that we call every sensible object beautiful. Thus, since everything void of form is by nature fitted for its reception, as far as it is destitute of reason and form, it is base, and separate from the divine reason, the great fountain of forms. And whatever is entirely remote from this immortal source is perfectly base and deformed. And such is matter, of which by nature is ever averse from the supervening irradiations of form. Now, of course, just to be clear here, that matter does participate in the good to some degree. It couldn't exist if it didn't participate in the good. But what he means by saying it's perfectly base and deformed is that it's the furthest removed from the good itself. Whenever, therefore, form accedes, the subject of its power should tend to unity, as far as the nature of a compound will admit. In other words, in the realms of reality, those closest to reality itself, to the forms itself, the absolute realities, is closest to unity. Hence, beauty is established in multitude when the many is reduced into one. So beauty is some sort of quality then of unity. And now a little bit about participation. The simple beauty of color arises when light, which is something incorporeal, and reason and form entering the obscure involutions of matter, irradiates and forms its dark and formless nature. Say what? Fortunately, he's going to give us some example. It is on this account that fire surpasses other bodies in beauty, because compared with the other elements, it obtains the order of form, for it is more eminent than the rest, and is the most subtle of all, bordering, as it were, on an incorporeal nature. So he's going to look at fire because it's something we understand. It is in our physical realm, of course, but he's saying that its functioning, or the way it functions, the way it behaves, is maybe closest thing in our physical world that he can think of that can tell us something about the forms. It's the closest thing to the form, so he's going to use it as something of an example. So what you want to do, looking at this example, is pull out what he says about fire and how it functions, and then think about how that would relate to the forms and what is he saying about the forms. So that's the work he's setting out for us. Add too that though impervious itself, it is intimately received by others, for it imparts heat but admits no cold. Hence it is the first nature which is ornamented with color, and is the source of it to others, and on this account it beams forth exalted like some immaterial form. But when it cannot vanquish its subject, is participating but a slender light, it is no longer beautiful, because it does not receive the whole form of color. So again, you want to pull out what he says there about fire, and then think about what that tells you about the forms, or the eidos. Beauty beyond the senses. So now he's starting to move up, or more profound, whichever way you want to think about it. But it is now time, leaving every object of sense far behind, to contemplate a certain ascent, a beauty of a much higher order, a beauty not visible to the corporeal eye, but alone manifest to the brighter eye of the soul, independent of all corporeal aid. But it is requisite to perceive objects of this kind with that eye by which the soul beholds such real beauties. Besides, it is necessary that whoever perceives this species of beauty should be seized with much greater delight and more vehement admiration than any corporeal beauty can excite, is now embracing beauty real and substantial. And the implication there, of course, is that corporeal beauty, while it has some mode of reality, is not ultimate reality and not ultimately substantial. Such affections, I say, ought to be excited about true beauty as admiration and sweet astonishment, desire also in love and a pleasant trepidation. For all souls, as I may say, are affected in this manner about invisible objects, but those the most who have the strongest propensity to their love. So the basic theory of recollection, Plato's theory of recollection, is that our souls know reality, but we need to be reminded through the education of the soul. And we can all be stirred, but some people are stirred more than others. And so that's where the next section takes us, the soul that can know beauty. What do you suffer or experience respecting fair studies and beautiful manners, virtuous works, affections and habits, and the beauty of souls? What do you experience on perceiving yourselves lovely within? And this you experience, whatever that is, you experience it as often as you turn your eye inward or contemplate the amplitude of another soul, the just manners, the pure temperance, the fortitude venerable by her noble countenance, and modesty and honesty walking with an intrepid step and a tranquil and steady aspect, and what crowns the beauty of them all, constantly receiving the irradiations of a divine intellect. Now let us suppose for a moment a soul that is deformed to be one that is intemperate and unjust, so does not have the virtues, filled with a multitude of desires, a prey to foolish hopes and vexed with idle fears, living the life, whatever it may be, peculiar to the passion of body, and so totally merged in sensuality as to esteem the base pleasant and the deformed to be beautiful and fair. If such a one then desires to recover his former beauty, it is necessary to cleanse the infected parts, and thus by a thorough purgation to refine his original form. Hence then, if we assert that the soul, by her mixture, confusion, and commerce with body and matter, becomes thus base, our assertion will, I think, be right. So we need purification. And so now he's going to talk about the unfolding of beauty. Indeed, as the ancient oracle declares, temperance and fortitude, prudence or wisdom, and every virtue are certain purgatives of the soul. And hence the sacred mysteries prophesy obscurely, yet in truth, that the soul not purified lies in Tartarus, immersed in filth, since the impure is, from his depravity, the friend of filth, as swine from their sordid body delights in mire alone. So the mysteries he's talking about are the mystical schools that were quite popular in his day and in Plato's day as well. And there is the story that we have to be purified in order to be with the gods. Otherwise we will be in Tartarus, he says here, immersed in filth. And there is a reference to this as well in Plato's works, in the Phaedo. He writes that wisdom itself is a sort of purification. Perhaps these people who direct the religious initiations are not so far from the mark, and all the time there has been an allegorical meaning behind their doctrine that he who enters the next world uninitiated and unenlightened shall lie in the mire, but he who arrives there purified and enlightened shall dwell among the gods. Okay, going back to Plotinus now, he says prudence, which is Thomas Taylor's translation for wisdom. Wisdom or prudence is no other than intelligence, declining subordinate objects and directing the eye of the soul to that which is immortal and divine. He says that the soul, thus refined, becomes form and reason, and it's altogether incorporeal and intellectual, and wholly participates of that divine nature, which is the fountain of loveliness, and of whatever is allied to the beautiful and fair. But intellect, and whatever emanates from intellect, is not the foreign, but it's the proper ornament of the soul, for the being or essence of the soul, when it's absorbed in intellect, is then alone real and true. So that's one of our goals, is to be immersed in intellect. It is therefore rightly said that the beauty and good of the soul consists in her similitude to the deity. For from hence flows all her beauty and her allotment of a better being. So many places throughout Plato's writing as well, he says that the fullest flowering of the virtues is to become as godlike as is humanly possible. That is one of our goals. And here's one example from Plato. This is from the Laws. He says, "He that is temperate among us is loved by God, for he is like God. Whereas he that is not temperate is unlike God and at variance with him. So also it is with the unjust." And the same rule holds for all else, runs through all the virtues. Okay, so section 7 then, Plotinus is now going on to talk about the beautiful itself. "Let us therefore reascend to the good itself, which every soul desires, and in which it can alone find perfect repose. Someone, having dismissed everything foreign from the God by himself alone, beholds the solitary principle of the universe, sincere, simple, and pure, from which all things depend, and to whose transcendent perfections the eyes of all intelligent natures are directed, as the proper cause of being, life, and intellect." So here he's talking about that beautiful union with the one itself, and what he's talking here about it being the cause of being, life, and intelligence. Why did he pick these three words, being, life, and intelligence? Well, any of you have read Proclus or are familiar with the later Platonists, this is the common metaphysics that is pulled out. Now, what we've already seen in past videos is that the good, or the one, then gives birth, if you will, to the intelligible. And there are many places where this will be talked about in a sort of a general sense. But if we want to understand the intelligible more in depth, especially when you look at Proclus, he'll break it into a triad of sorts, where he'll talk about its being, or its very, or what it is, and its life is its vitality. Its intellect is its ability to turn and look at itself. And so these are three aspects that work together. And you'll see this basic pattern run through all of the realms of reality. And so this is probably developed most thoroughly by Proclus, but you can see here that it already was the way that this was being discussed by Plotinus. So what then must be the condition of that being who beholds the beautiful itself? In itself perfectly pure, not confined by any corporeal bond, neither existing in the heavens nor in the earth, nor to be imaged by the most lovely form imagination can conceive, since these are all adventitious and mixed in mere secondary beauties, proceeding from the beautiful itself. So all of these things proceed from the beautiful itself. The beautiful itself is even more divine, more profound. Add too that since the object of contest to souls is the highest beauty, we should strive for its acquisition with unabated ardor, lest we should be deserted from that blissful contemplation, which whoever pursues in the right way becomes blessed from the happy vision, and which he who does not obtain is unavoidably unhappy. So this means we want to turn away from corporeal beauty. Now, there is a common notion that Plotinus was adverse to corporeal beauty, and there certainly are passages that you can pull out to say, look, this is very negative comment about beauty. He despised the body. I think it's more accurate to say that his view is not that the physical is something evil, but that it's a distraction if your goal is this union with beauty itself. What measures then shall we adopt? We must enter deep into ourselves, and leaving behind the objects of corporeal sight, no longer look back after any of the accustomed spectacles of sense. For it is necessary that whoever beholds this beauty should withdraw his view from the fairest corporeal forms, and convinced that these are nothing more than images, vestiges and shadows of beauty, should eagerly soar to the fair original from which they are derived. For by thus embracing and adhering to corporeal forms, he is precipitated not so much in his body as in his soul, into profound and horrid darkness, and thus blind like those in the infernal regions, converses only with phantoms, deprived of the perception of what is real and true. So comparing people in Plato's allegorical cave to those people in Hades. And the word Hades, by the way, means not seen. Having now closed the corporeal eye, we must stir up and assume a pure eye within, which all of us possess, but which alone is used by the few. And so now we get to the last section where he's going to say a few words about experiencing the beautiful itself. What is it then this inward eye beholds? Indeed, suddenly raised to intellectual vision, it cannot, at least not yet, perceive an object exceedingly bright, and not yet because suddenly raised. So we need to develop some habit or some familiarity with that brighter vision. Recall your thoughts inward, and if, while contemplating yourself, you do not perceive yourself beautiful, imitate the statuary or the sculptor, who, when he desires a beautiful statue, cuts away what is superfluous, smooths and polishes what is rough, and never desists until he has given it all the beauty his art is able to effect. In this manner must you proceed, by lopping what is luxuriant, directing what is oblique, and by purgation illustrating what is obscure, and thus continue to polish and beautify your statue, until the divine splendor of virtue shines upon you, and temperance, seated in pure and holy majesty, rises to your view. Again, that image that the highest flowering of the virtues that we develop within ourselves is to become as godlike as is humanly possible, a form of purgation. For it is here necessary that the perceiver and the thing perceived should be similar to each other before true vision can exist. Everyone, therefore, must become divine and of godlike beauty before he can gaze upon a God and the beautiful itself. So again, that idea of similitude. This is also, by the way, the law of providence, that we can participate in the divine realms to the degree that we're able. And we're able to participate in higher realms by becoming more like those higher realms. Thus, proceeding in the right way of beauty, he will first descend into the region of intellect, contemplating every fair species, the beauty of which he will perceive to be no other than ideas themselves. And that's the outer world in Plato's cave allegory, the upper world. For all things are beautiful by the supervening irradiations of these, because they are the offspring and essence of intellect. But that which is superior to these is no other than the fountain of good, everywhere widely diffusing around the streams of beauty, and hence in discourse called the beautiful itself, because beauty is its immediate offspring. So in other words, some people may, in more casual way of speaking, equate the good and the beautiful, because the beautiful is sort of the experience, if you will, of the good. But he's saying here that it is the immediate offspring of the good. But if you accurately distinguish the intelligible objects, you will call the beautiful the receptacle of ideas, but the good itself, which is superior, the fountain and principle of the beautiful. And there he's giving us his view, but then he's going to end this essay by giving us a puzzle. he says that you may want to place the first beautiful and the good in the same principle, independent of the beauty which there subsists. And that's how he ends it. So he ends it saying, you decide. In other words, you have to have the experience yourself. And that's where I'm going to pick up next week. Next week, what I want to do is get into more of the practical side. Now, some of you may watch these videos and just enjoy hearing these passages from Plotinus, and that's perfectly fine. And maybe in the future you will have the desire to get more deeply into it, but even just thinking about these things in a sort of passive way is still something. And so it's still a good thing to do. But I know that there are some people watching this channel who are interested in actually getting deeper into the life of philosophy, and I have gotten some requests to look more at the practical side of how to do this and how to read these works in a way that is transformational, or what to do with them so that we can build a practice where we can actually have these kinds of experiences, or this union with the good itself. How to and have the experience is not just to chase experience, but to have that transformation that comes from the insights that follow such an experience. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about next week and the week after. So I do hope you'll join me for that. Now, if you like what you saw here, I would appreciate a thumbs up. And also, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave those below. And also, if you don't already subscribe, I do hope that you will think about doing so. So thank you very much. See you next time.